Ron Dalton Jr. was on Sarnetta, where he discussed a significant topic. The poster read, 90% of Israelite leaders don't know who the Canaanites are. Why do they avoid teaching or debating this subject? In his presentation, which lasted 4 hours, 44 minutes, and 53 seconds, he made several intriguing claims. In this review, I will focus exclusively on the first 26 minutes and 42 seconds of his video. I won't cover everything. You can find the full video on Sarnetta's channel. What I'm going to do is I will outline the foundation of his premise and then provide a critical review. If this premise is incorrect, then his entire theory will likely be flawed. Let's listen in very carefully to what he presents.
So, looking at this DNA genetic map of the haplogroups on the maternal side, we have to understand that the Israelites, like I said earlier in the last show that some Israelites didn't get, is that Jacob only had one daughter. And so to be an Israelite, you have to be from the womb of his wives, and you had to be from his loins, his sperm. So Dinah was the only Israelite woman from the start. And the 12 sons and their sister, they had to keep the lineage going by having sex with the opposite race and having children. But you are who your father is, and the Israelite boys were tasked with continuing the bloodline based on the pedigree of the Israelites is based on your father's lineage. And so when the Israelites with Jacob's 12 sons, when they went into Egypt with Joseph, they obviously were in the land of Egypt, and they had to repopulate their lineage with women. Common sense tells us these Israelite women, Israelite men are not going to have children with their sister. They're not going to have children with their mothers or stepmothers or play mothers like Rachel and Leah, Zilpah, and Bilhah. All of the Israelites did not come from one mother. All the 12 tribes did not come from one mother. They came from various mothers. Therefore, we know that these Israelite men are not going to sleep with their mother or play mothers. That's incense. And I'm sure the husband, Jacob, would not approve of that. Anyway, so the Israelites had to procreate with the other women of Ham in Egypt and in Sudan, the land of Cush, even the land of Put. But the land of Canaan is what we're going to focus on today. Why do we see so many maternal DNA haplogroups in sub-Saharan Africa? Because a lot of the Bantu people and West Africans come from the wombs of non-Israelite mothers from the beginning. Egyptians, Canaanites, Cushites. This is a fact. This is a logic and critical thinking. When you look at the maternal...
Now I'm going to list his main points. Dinah's role and the lack of Israelite women. Ron Dalton emphasizes that Dinah was the only Israelite woman at the time, which created a practical issue for Jacob's sons. Since there were no other Israelite women available, according to Ron, the sons would have had to marry outside their immediate family. This argument implies that intermarriage with Canaanites, Egyptians, or other local groups was a necessity for the survival and growth of the Israelite lineage. My position on this is completely inaccurate. I will demonstrate that. Number 2, claim about marrying Canaanites and Egyptians. Ron explicitly states that Jacob's sons had to keep the lineage going by having sex with the opposite race and having children. He argues that the Israelite bloodline is determined by the father's lineage, meaning that even if the sons married non-Israelite women, example Canaanites or Egyptians, the children will still be considered Israelites because of their paternal descent. Again, how accurate is this? I disagree, and I will demonstrate that. Shocking, huh? Let's move on. Patrilineal descent as the key factor. Ron Dalton Jr. repeatedly stresses that Israelite identity is determined by the father's line, not the mother's. This means that even if Jacob's sons married non-Israelite women, their children will still be considered Israelites because they were descended from Jacob. This argument is used to justify the idea that intermarriage with Canaanites or Egyptians will not compromise the Israelite lineage. My question to my brother Ron is, are you sure? I will state a different position. Rejection of incest. Ron makes it clear that incest was not an option for Jacob's sons. He explicitly states that the sons will not have married their mothers, stepmothers, or play mothers. I don't know what that meant. Example, Rachel, Leah, Bilhah, or Zilpah. Ron refers to such relationships as incest and firmly rejects the idea that this would have been accepted or practiced. Now, since incest was not an option, Ron Dalton Jr. argues that Jacob's sons had to marry outside their immediate family. This reinforces his claim that the sons likely married Canaanites, Egyptians, or other non-Israelite women to continue the lineage. Ron uses this point to support the argument that the Israelite bloodline was preserved through the father's lineage, even if the mothers were not Israelites. Ron, are you sure? Incests. I would argue differently. Genetic evidence and intermarriage. The speaker ties this claim to genetic evidence, discussing haplogroups and the migration of people from Egypt, Canaan, and Africa. He suggests that the genetic markers found in these regions today reflect the historical intermarriage between Jacob's children, Israelites, and other groups. He uses this genetic data to argue that the Israelites' lineage includes contributions from Canaanites, Egyptians, and other neighboring populations. So to summarize everything, Ron does claim that Jacob's sons likely married Canaanite, Egyptians, or other non-Israelite women due to the lack of Israelite women at the time. However, he argues that this did not compromise the Israelites' lineage because identity was determined by the father's line. My position. Every single point my brother Ron Dalton makes is inaccurate, undermining his entire theory. I am going to present my position. Ron Dalton Jr. posits that the sons of the biblical patriarch Jacob necessarily married Canaanite and Egyptian women to perpetuate the Israelites' lineage. This argument is predicated on two main premises. Number one, the scarcity of Israelite women, with Dinah cited as the sole example. And number two, the principle of patriarchal descent, which asserts that a child's Israelite identity is secured through the father, regardless of the mother's origins. Ron further employs modern genetic evidence, specifically haplogroup data, to support this theory of extensive intermarriage. This review will systematically analyze his position and argue that it stands in direct opposition to the overwhelming weight of biblical, cultural, and theological evidence. The assertion that Jacob's sons married outside their kinfold or their kin group overlooks the established patriarchal traditions, which is the self-sustaining nature of Jacob's household and the profound theological importance of maintaining a distinct covenantal lineage. I will demonstrate that the more compelling and scripturally consistent argument is that the sons of Jacob practiced endogamy, marrying within their extended family and household, thereby preserving their unique identity as they grew into a nation. The biblical evidence. Ron Dalton Jr.'s claim fundamentally misinterprets the explicit and consistent biblical stance on intermarriage with neighboring people. I'll repeat that. Ron Dalton's claim fundamentally misinterprets the explicit and consistent biblical stance on intermarriage with neighboring people. The Pentateuch presents a clear narrative precedent that strongly discourages exogamy, particularly with Canaanites. This tradition begins with Abraham, who made his servant swear an oath not to take a wife for Isaac from among the Canaanites, but to do what? But to return to his own kindred. We see that in Genesis 24. Now Abraham was old, well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said to his servant, which is Eliezer, the oldest of his household, who had charge of all that he had. This is very important. This is his right-hand man. Eliezer of Damascus is the one in charge of Abraham's household, his CFO. Okay, let's take it again from the top. And Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who had charge of all that he had, put your hand under my thigh. He's asking him to hold his groin, that I may make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of the earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanite among whom I dwell, but will go to my country and to my kindred and take a wife for my son Isaac. Now, Abraham could have taken Eliezer's daughter for Isaac. This servant, who is now following Abraham and his God. This is his loyal servant. He's converted. He's following Abraham. Abraham has entrusted everything into his hands. He has sons and daughters. If Abraham wants a daughter to marry Isaac to, why not turn to Eliezer? After all, he's the one who manages your estate. However, Abraham refuses to do that. And then he asks Eliezer to swear an oath against exogamy. Now Eliezer is going to say something that is going to make Abraham a bit upset. He did not notice that. Let's read carefully. The servant said to him, perhaps, a very important word in the Hebrew, perhaps the woman may not be willing to follow me to this land. Must I then take your son back to the land from which you came? You think this is a very innocent statement, but no, it's not. I want you to focus on that word perhaps. There are two Hebrew words for perhaps, ulai or pen. But they have distinct meanings and connotations. Let me explain. When you use ulai, it expresses possibility or hope. This is a perhaps that you want to happen. A perhaps that you want to happen. Okay, and then you have pen. Pen expresses caution or a warning. This is a perhaps that you don't want to happen. So, we have to find out which perhaps does Eliezer use in Genesis 24 verses 5. Does he use ulai or does he use pen? Because it would tell us what he is thinking. Now, the word perhaps that Eliezer used is ulai, which is a perhaps that you want to happen. So the perhaps used here conveys a subtle undertone of hope or desire from the servant, wishing that the woman would choose not to come. He uses ulai. I want you to check this with your Hebrew-speaking teachers. Maybe they haven't noticed it. I bet they have. I won't take anything from them. But it's important to find out which perhaps Eliezer uses here. So he uses ulai, meaning that Eliezer is hoping that this woman that he is going to go look for to come and marry Isaac will not come. He's hoping the woman would decide not to come. So he uses ulai. So it reflects the servant's internal feelings. But why would Eliezer hope for this outcome? This is where the sages tell us that Eliezer may have had a daughter and wished for Isaac to marry her. Then Abraham becomes upset when he hears Eliezer's use of the word ulai while asking the question. Perhaps the woman may not be willing to follow me. It's a perhaps that he hopes would happen. How does Abraham respond? Abraham said to him, see to it that you do not take my son back there. He's upset. He's frustrated. Why? Is this not the man who was advised to sever all ties with his past? To leave his father's house and his birthplace in order to start something fresh? Yet, when it came time for him to find a wife, he chose not from among the locals, but returned to his own people to seek a spouse. Quite interesting. This practice was upheld by the next generation. Isaac and Rebekah were deeply grieved by their son Esau's marriage to a Hittite woman. Genesis 26. When Esau was 40 years old, he took Judith, the daughter of Beri the Hittite, to be his wife, and who? Basmath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. And that made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. Why is this? Does it matter? Esau can still continue the Hebrew lineage. He can have children with these Hittites, and they will still be Hebrews. No. Isaac and Rebekah were grieved. They were angry. They were upset. They were disappointed. To prevent Jacob from a similar fate, they explicitly sent him to Haran to find a wife from within their own family, endogamy. Now look at something very interesting and powerful. Esau noticed this, and what did he do? And he tried to correct the mistake. Genesis 28. Now Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away to Paddan Aram to take a wife from there. They don't want to marry the locals. And that as he blessed him, he directed him, "You must not take a wife from the Canaanite women." This stands against Ron Dalton Jr.'s position. You must not take a wife from the Canaanite women. And that Jacob had obeyed his father and his mother and gone to Paddan Aram. So when Esau saw that the Canaanite women did not please Isaac his father, Esau went to Ishmael and took as his wife, besides the wives he had, Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son. What is Esau doing? He is upholding this practice of endogamy, marrying within the same kingfold. And I'm here to demonstrate that that is exactly what Jacob practiced. And I'm here to show that it goes against Ron Dalton Jr.'s position completely. You see how Esau goes to correct it. This speaks of an unwavering patriarchal precedent. The practice of endogamy, marrying within the same kingfold. Let's follow Jacob. Who married Jacob? His cousins. Is this not incest? No. Ron does this a lot, projecting modern standards on the past. In the context of the ancient Near East and biblical times, it was not considered incest. The Bible later provides explicit laws about incest in Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20, which outlines prohibited relationships. These laws were given much later, and they define incest as sexual relations between close relatives, such as, pay attention to the list, parent and child, siblings, grandparent and grandchild, aunt, uncle, and niece, nephew, half siblings. Cousins are not included in these prohibitions. I repeat that again. Cousins are not included in these prohibitions. Marrying a cousin was not considered incest under biblical law, or even in the ancient Near East. Jacob married his cousins, still practicing endogamy. So Ron Dalton Jr.'s position on incest, his claim, also doesn't hold water according to the text and according to the tradition. So Jacob's subsequent marriages to his cousins, Leah and Rachel, reinforced this as a foundational principle for the covenantal family. They have not gone outside their kinfold. Jacob is upholding the patriarchal precedent. Jacob's cousins, according to the Table of Nations, are Semites. There have been no mixtures here. Now, Jacob has all his sons and daughters in Laban's house in Haran. Upon leaving Haran, Jacob led a large semi-nomadic clan, not just a nuclear family. This group included his wives, 12 children, and a substantial number of male and female servants, as we see in Genesis 31. This extended household of Semites form a self-sufficient social unit with a significant internal marriage pool. They don't require assistance from outsiders to grow and expand, going totally against Ron Dalton Jr.'s position. Let's move on. So they left Haran, and then they come to the land of Canaan. When they got back to the land of Canaan, Jacob settles in Shechem, where he purchases a piece of land. After Dinah was raped, Hamor says to Jacob, listen to his words carefully. Genesis 34, 8-9. But Hamor spoke with them, saying, the soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him to be his wife. Make marriages with us. Give your daughters, plural, to us, and take our daughters for yourselves. Daughters is in the plural, indicating more than just Dinah. There were other women of marriageable age in Jacob's household. Where did they come from? He brought them from Haran. So you see that the argument for necessary exogamy, marrying outside their kinfold, overlooks the size and structure of Jacob's household. Ron Dalton Jr. did not factor this into his argument. He overlooks this important tradition and what the biblical text tells us. I don't think he does that intentionally. It's just that he has not taken the time, I believe, to really study the text. And saying this respectfully, not to throw shade, but it does happen sometimes. So the biblical text hints at a larger family than is often assumed. Genesis 37, 35 mentions Jacob's sons and all his daughters, plural, comforting him after Joseph's apparent death, implying the existence of other daughters besides Dinah. So these unnamed daughters, along with female cousins or women from the servant families integrated into the household, would have been considered suitable partners for Jacob and his sons. They did not have to practice exogamy. Now, this practice of endogamy was a common strategy in ancient Near Eastern clan societies to consolidate resources, maintain social cohesion, and preserve cultural identity. Therefore, marrying within this extended household was not only possible, but culturally normative. Now, the only person who broke this rule was who? Guess. Judah. No wonder. But scholarship tells us that Genesis 38 was a later insertion. It's not part of the core Joseph narrative. It was inserted later. It interrupts the flow of the narrative. So you remove Genesis 38, which was added later, you would notice that none of Jacob's children practiced exogamy. They did not marry outside of their kinfold. They did not marry the neighbors, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Perizzites, all of these people. They actually married within their fold. So given this unwavering patriarchal precedent, it is highly improbable that Jacob's own sons would have abruptly abandoned this deeply ingrained tradition. It's highly improbable. Let's look at their descent to Egypt. Ron argues that they had to have had help from the Canaanites, from the Egyptians, so that they can continue this lineage. Ron paints a picture as if it were Jacob with his 13 children and 4 wives who walked into Egypt. No. Ron should read the text. Genesis 46 provides a genealogy of Jacob's family who went to Egypt. The chapter lists the sons and grandsons of Jacob, indicating that several of his sons had children before the migration. Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, had 4 sons. Simon had 6 sons. Levi had 3 sons. Issachar had 4 sons. Zebulun had 3 sons. Gad had 7 sons. Asher had 4 sons. Dan had 1 son. Naphtali had 4 sons. So this genealogy shows that many of Jacob's sons had already started families before they moved to Egypt. So they did not need help growing as Ron presents it. Not at all. From the 70 souls, not mentioning children and women, Jacob could practice endogamy. And out of this 70, they did not have to go outside to help them grow. What happened when they got to Egypt? Joseph segregated them. That was the strategy. Staying true to that unwavering patriarchal precedent of not marrying outside your fold. Joseph does something pretty strategic. The strategic segregation of the Israelites in the land of Goshen upon their arrival in Egypt further enabled this internal growth. insulating them from Egyptian society and reducing the likelihood of intermarriage. Joseph created the first ghetto. Genesis 46. Let's read it. When Pharaoh calls you and says, this is what Joseph is telling his brothers. When Pharaoh calls you and says, what is your occupation? You shall say, your servants have been keepers of livestock from our youth, even until now, both we and our fathers, in order that you may dwell in the land of Goshen. He's segregating them. For every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. So say this to Pharaoh so that you are segregated. This will make it easy for us not to intermarry. This will make it easy for us to keep this patriarchal precedent of endogamy, marrying amongst ourselves. So there you have it. You get to judge for yourself. Did Jacob and his children, his sons, intermarry? The evidence clearly says no, they did not. They did everything possible to stay true to that patriarchal precedent of endogamy. Let's move on to genetic evidence. Ron's use of genetic haplogroup data to argue for intermarriage is anachronistic and also speculative. While genetic markers can trace broad patterns of ancient migrations, they cannot pinpoint the specific marital practices of a single family during the patriarchal era. Let me repeat that. I am saying that genetic markers can trace broad patterns of ancient migrations. They cannot pinpoint the specific marital practices of a single family during the patriarchal era. Citing the presence of certain African or Near Eastern haplogroups like L1, L2, L3 in modern populations and linking them to a supposed policy of intermarriage by Jacob's sons is a significant leap of logic. Genetic admixture within populations occur over millennia through various events, including migration, conquest, trade, and later periods of intermarriage. Attributing this admixture to a foundational practice by the 12 sons of Jacob in defiance of biblical and cultural norms is an unsubstantiated claim. The genetic data does not and cannot prove that Jacob's sons married Canaanite or Egyptian women. It cannot. Actually, if you do, you would fall short because according to the primary source that we have, which is the biblical text, which we have just looked at, they did not intermarry. Jacob's sons did not intermarry. Now, a more plausible interpretation is that the Israelites, as a Semitic people, shared a common genetic heritage with other groups in the region, which is reflected in the complex genetic map of the Near East and Africa today. Ron can make that statement and it would be accurate. But the statement that he's making, the argument that he's making, falls flat on its face. The evidence does not bear witness to it. Conclusions. The proposition that Jacob's sons married Canaanites and Egyptians is a theory built on selective reading of scripture and the misapplication of genetic science. It disregards the powerful biblical precedent of endogamy established by Abraham and Isaac. It ignores the self-sufficient nature of Jacob's clan and dismisses the profound theological need to preserve a distinct covenantal identity. The biblical narrative, supported by cultural and historical context, points overwhelmingly to the conclusion that the sons of Jacob continued the tradition of marrying within their own extended kin group. This practice enabled the fledgling nation to maintain its unique identity and grow exponentially while in Egypt, fulfilling the divine promise to Abraham without compromising the integrity of the covenantal line. Ron misses that. The argument of exogamy, which Ron Dalton Jr. posits, while provocative, ultimately fails when weighed against the evidence. Again, I am not doing this to mock my brother Ron Dalton Jr. I have taken time to listen to him, to understand where he is coming from. And what I am picking up is that he is not paying very close attention to the text. A detailed analysis of the entire text before jumping into conclusions. And this is making him go on a certain tangent that makes him seem right. But when cross-examined, we notice has a lot of holes and doesn't hold water. What my brother can do is take some time, examine the text carefully, and make sure that the text aligns with his position. If it does, now someone like me can really sit down and follow what he's saying, because with my background, it's extremely difficult to give him an ear because his position goes contrary to the text, like I've demonstrated. So, this is all to build the community and not to take anything away from Ron. Iron sharpeneth iron. And again, I'm in talks with Ron if he's able to agree to just a 1 hour sit down, as I have proposed. Of course, we can make that happen. Okay, see you on the next video. Shalom.